Morning, everybody. Sunny Mondays. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's political correspondent, Sophie Huskisson. Morning, Sophie.
Good morning. How are you?
Better now the sun's shining for a bit. Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments. Ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to say you'll leave, but hang around till the election anyway. So what have we got? Well, the Mirror has splashed on Labour leader Keir Starmer meeting schoolchildren with Baroness Doreen Lawrence and vowing to make the country fit so that every child can meet their full potential in honour of her murdered son, Stephen. Now, more on that in the paper, but first I want to take us to page 11, where there's one person who's decided he's going to fulfil his potential, whether we like it or not. Now, this is the filed MP, Mark Menzies, who will apparently be gracing us with his presence in the House of Commons until election day. Sophie, can you take us through this? Why is that in question?
So basically this is the big story that broke last week after a big investigation by the Times into Mark Menzies. Lots of allegations have come from that, which include essentially him using funds that have been donated by local donors to a local Conservative group, the local Westminster filed group, as opposed to the Conservative Party. Now, remember that bit because that's important. Gone to the local group. Now, these funds have been used for personal reasons. So one of the main ones that you may have seen in the press is that at 3:15 a.m., Mark Menzies called up his campaign manager and said he was locked in a room. It was a
Can I just stop you there for a minute? He called up his 78-year-old campaign manager at 3:15 a.m. I wouldn't call my mother at that time of day. Sorry.
Saying it was a matter of life and death, and he was locked in a room with bad people, and he said he needed £5,000 to get unlocked and to be released from this. He needed to pay these bad people. This figure ended up after Katie Fieldhouse, the campaign manager, diverted the call away. It ended up getting raised to £6,500. He still needs more money at this point, and it ends up actually getting paid. There have also been allegations that have arisen about him using thousands of pounds to pay for private medical bills from this donor money. As you can imagine, that's not what the donor money was intended to be used for. He is, and I will say, denying these allegations. He's disputing them. But essentially,
saying they're not true, is it?
Yeah. As soon as the allegations came out, he then relinquished the Tory whip, so he was sitting as an independent. And part of this story that has made it so much worse, I think, as well, and concerning for voters, is that Katie Fieldhouse, this campaign manager, had actually complained to Simon Hart, the Tory chief whip, 3 months ago. And nothing had happened. And it took this newspaper investigation from the Times for it to come out. And you have to think constituents in Fylde will be wondering, why didn't we know about this? This is our MP. Anyway, as time's gone along, Mark Menzies himself, again, this isn't Rishi Sunak doing this, he has decided to quit the Tory whip and said that he'll stand down at the next election, which obviously we don't know when that is. We can call for a general election now, but we still don't know the date of that. And the Conservative Party headquarters have basically said, we can't conclude that the wrongdoing was actually done and that this was a misuse of party funds because these weren't donations made to us, to the central CCHQ. They were made to the local filed Westminster group. So they've said that, but they have said, but there appears to be a pattern of behaviour that falls below our standards. But what we have to remember is they haven't handed down this punishment. This is Mark Menzies himself who said, best stand back. So until then, he will still be the filed MP. He'll just be an independent MP and not a Tory MP. He'll just be around the House of Commons, still serving his constituents, whether they like that or not. Because, it's not going to a by-election. And I think, Susie, we probably know why. As there's been loads of by-elections. There's going to be a by-election soon in the nearby constituency of Blackpool South on the same day as local elections. And let's just say there have been quite a lot of heavy losses for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. And one might question whether they might want to avoid that.
Yeah, gosh, well, blimey, my head's reeling, and I even knew all that stuff to start with. So what do you think, everybody? Mark Menzies is not going anywhere. This is an MP who's been well, disgraced more than once, but very badly disgraced in the past week. We would not have found out about this if there hadn't been a newspaper investigation. Steve says he's a Tory. He spends his whole life locked up with bad people. I did think there when he said he was in the room saying he's locked up with bad people. I thought, what? And they want him to vote, but not letting him out until he follows the whip. He's had this big scandal. He's disgraced. I think that's fair to say, even though he disputes these allegations. And he says, well, I'm just going to hang about. And that's just, I mean, the tractor porn MP didn't do that. Some of the lobbying scandals we've had, some of the other problems that have been coming out in this government, they didn't say, well, yes, I admit everything, but I'm going to hang around. Boris Johnson didn't do that. He was off-ski. I mean, so what do you think, everyone? Do you think this is reasonable that he should be hanging about? It's only a few more months. We haven't got very long. Not going to be paying him much. We are going to be paying him pro rata, 80 odd grand a year for hanging about. So Mark Menzies has been accused of all sorts over his time as an MP. There was drugs with a rent boy. I was getting the dog drunk. Now using donor funds to pay someone who's holding him hostage. Alan says he should be sacked and put on the dole. But there's been this internal investigation which found that it wasn't an internal problem. So, but presumably, Sophie, it's still a problem of some sort. If funds have been given for one particular reason, even if it's to an organisation which Mark set up himself to get re-elected, for example, or to help in his constituency, then using it for something else is fraud, isn't it? An allegation.
Yeah, so that's the big question, isn't it? And there are going to be several different questions coming up for Rishi Sunak at the moment. So you've got the number one thing that when he came in as Prime Minister, if we remember, and he made that speech about professionalism, integrity and accountability, at the highest level across his government, which is yet to be seen a year and a half in. So there will be questions about him and his leadership and whether he's been accused of being weak many times and not taking action quick enough. But then on the other side, as you say, what are these allegations that we're actually looking at and how serious they are? So Labour Party Chair Annalise Dodds has written to Lancashire Police and has asked them to look into the allegations. Now, they are looking into them. We don't know how far that will go, whether that will go into a full-scale investigation yet. And CCHQ have said that they will cooperate with them and any evidence that they've had, they will hand over. So this could get a lot worse quite quickly. And again, it will fall on Rishi Sunak's head of, well, why haven't you taken any action? This is your party. You are the Prime Minister. Where is the accountability, integrity and professionalism we're all looking for?
Do you know, I remember that speech because he said it in the order of IPA, integrity, professionalism and accountability. And that's what I think he had about 10 pints of, even though he didn't drink, before he accepted the job. Kate says, no, he should be out. No privileges, no pension, no payoff. He would get his pension regardless of what grounds that he left under, okay, as would we all in all our jobs. Steve says in any other walk of life, he'd be sacked. Why is he allowed to hang around like a stale fart in a lift? I think you could have a recall petition. Someone could do that. But I think perhaps the fact that there is going to be a general election very soon might make it an issue of taxpayers' money. Do we want to have a by-election when we're so close to having one anyway? Now, it's being reported, though, that Menzies may have broken some of the Nolan principles on conduct in public life. You know, his own campaign manager, who's one of those people that he rang at 3 a.m., isn't exactly a fan. No one's going to go out and campaign for this guy to get re-elected and filed. It's hard to see how anyone really could tolerate him much longer, whether it's voters or his colleagues. But he's hanging on anyway. Isn't this, like you said, Sophie, a rather blatant move by the Tories to just avoid another humiliating by-election? There's been an agreement internally almost, because this wasn't party funds, it was donor funds. We can say it's nothing to do with us and we can avoid a by-election. Let's just make Mark lose the whip and hope it all blows over.
Yeah, he's no longer a Tory, nothing to do with us. He's independent now. I mean, I think that's definitely a suggestion we can make. I think as we've seen with the Tories, for however long now. It's been scandal after scandal, and just they're having to fight fires, and wherever they can, they're just trying to dodge them, delay them, put them further into the future. And we see this attitude so many times where they just hope, oh, I'm sure it'll die down. The public are not happy with things dying down, and they always say, oh, it's the press, it's the journalists keeping it all out. No, actually, we hear from our readers, we're on this call now and we can see what people are saying. But they want to see some accountability with the people that are the highest level in our government. We saw this. I was talking about, how we had Frank Hester, the Tory donor, who allegedly made these comments about Diane Abbott, saying that looking at Diane Abbott made him want to hate all black women. And for ages, Rishi Sunak, the government, the ministers, they're all out saying, oh, it's unacceptable, and they wouldn't say it's racist. And then they try and delay it, they try and dodge it, probably it will die down. And then in the end, they did have to say it was racist. They did. And they will always try and find a way to get through things. And you feel like you're watching this PR disaster play out in front of you. And you just think, come on, just try and do the right thing at the start.
I mean, it's simple media management. It doesn't matter what your politics are. There are things you should just be honest and straight out with, and honest things that you don't. But we saw this under Boris Johnson particularly, who's had a lifetime of wriggling. And even though he's gone, it seems that the party behind him is still just naturally following the Boris kind of playbook. This is how we deal with things. We're just going to have a wriggle, and it's not going to necessarily work. Now, Mr. Menzies, like we've said, strongly disputes these allegations. But it must be said, when he said when the Rent Boy story broke about a decade ago, he said he was looking forward to setting the record straight in due course, and we're still waiting for him to do so. I think the record's got a bit kinky since then. Now, that all said, Sophie, MPs have a right to a private life as long as it doesn't break laws. Surely this chap, who, love him or loathe him, he seems to be quite troubled. Wouldn't he be better off outside the political bubble rather than spending between now and a general election? He's facing possibility of constituency anger and recalls, Labour constantly banging on about him, these issues being raised time and time again, problems at work, obviously people avoiding him whatever in the House of Commons. Wouldn't he be better off, for duty of care, I suppose, just say, do you know what, go about your business, go and look after yourself? Are the party making him hang in there? Perhaps it's not in his best interests, but it is theirs.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I guess that is always a question, isn't it? Of in the political sphere, like you say, there's such a performance aspect of this. It's crisis management and making sure that things look okay on the surface. As I say, trying to quell that fire and make it look like there's a sense of stability. I mean, I'm not privy to the conversations that they've had, and you'd like to think that Mark Menzies has had some level of control over this, but I mean,
you don't think someone's rung him up and said, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
What do you need?
You would like to think, but it is very difficult in these situations. You feel that certainly decisions are often made in the name of the party as opposed to the name of the individual. And I think it's a really important point to make. He's clearly allegedly made some serious mistakes, or he's got some serious allegations leveled against him. But yeah, there is a person at the heart of this that clearly does seem to perhaps need help if these are to be true. And yeah, it's something we should always keep at the forefront of our mind. I think it's something that I've found working in politics, that you can walk past MPs in the day who you've been writing an article about earlier on, and they are a person who often, not always, but often are trying to do the best job they can.
Yeah. And as much as we, find some of these things quite funny, it usually is an indication that some wheels are coming off somewhere. So we'll have to just see how it goes. But it does seem like the Tory party is being perhaps a little bit cruel to one of its own, and in turn, via him, cruel to the constituents who plainly want someone else. But by-elections, aren't they embarrassing? But we need to move on to the main story of the day. We're now less than a year out from this general election. It has to be called sometime between now and next January. In fact, we're only 10 days from local elections, which might precipitate a general if they go badly. Increasingly, we're seeing like a Tory policy blitz, which all sound very like what could be manifesto positions when we finally get there. Now, Sophie, can you take us through this one? It's on page 2 of today's Mirror, which is about the child benefit cap. What's it all about?
So this is the 2-child benefit cap. It was introduced in 2017, and basically there are a number of different child benefits that you can get, and this specifically relates to child tax credit and universal credit. And the Tories introduced it in 2017, and it means that you can only get those benefits on the first 2 children, and that's in most households. There are a few exceptions, but that's basically the deal. Now, this, when it came out, Labour, they totally attacked it. Over the years, they've called it a heinous policy. And we've got Child Poverty Action Group, Resolution Foundation, loads of big charities and organisations that have just plainly done like very, data-led, fact-led research that basically shows that because of this cap, most families who would be getting benefits are missing out on 3,200. 10%, 1 in 10 of youngsters in this country are affected by this policy. And, it would cost, and obviously this sounds like a big amount of money when I'm about to say it, but in government terms, it would cost less than 2 billion, which is not a huge amount in the amount of money that they're throwing around here, there and everywhere. If we'd done a bit better on scraping back that COVID fraud, we'd probably be able to lift the cap and take around 300,000 children out of poverty. And, we can always make the argument that, okay, well, things are tight. There's been the war in Ukraine. There's been COVID. The purse strings are tight. We understand that. The taxpayer understands that. We understood that the furlough scheme had to cost things. We understand that. But there are always priorities in government. There is always money to spend. And I think it's a very difficult argument to make that bringing kids out of poverty is not something that you want to spend money on. So basically, that's the policy, that's the deal. And over the weekend, Rishi Sunak basically kind of said that this is going to be a policy that will be in the Tory manifesto. He said it in one way or another that we can see this. And I think the very difficult thing that we have, Susie, is that this is also a policy that Labour have said that they're not going to repeal when they get into government, which is a very difficult thing. It's a very difficult thing for us, our paper, our readers, and obviously everyone in the country who is affected by this 2-child benefit cap, because they also say, the purse strings are too tight, and they say this is a Tory policy. We never wanted to introduce it in the first place. And we end up in this situation where we feel like we can't get rid of it. But it just feels that on both sides that many families will not be happy with that explanation, I don't think.
No, and it's worth bearing in mind that, of course, you can have several children and be perfectly well off and then suddenly find yourself in need of benefits through no fault of your own. You can lose your job, you can become very ill, you can become widowed or a widower or whatever.
Made redundant,
suddenly find yourself a bit stuffed and there's 3 or 4 children and you're only getting help with the top 2. So it's not necessarily a case of, the whole lifestyle choice thing. But this is interesting to me. So what do you think, everyone? What do you think about the 2-child benefit cap? Do you think that has to stay? Do you think it's important enough to stay, or do you think Labour or whoever should be looking at changing this? Because it's not really a traditionally kind of conservative policy either. Even under austerity, they didn't introduce this kind of cap. One Nation Tories are very much about helping children up out of poverty. So it's interesting, perhaps, that they're doing this. And what's interesting to me, Sophie, is that Labour aren't saying they're going to reverse it. It's already legislation. So it's kind of moot point, really. Yet Rishi's making a big fuss about it and wanting to say it's going to go in a manifesto. We've also had in the last few weeks, disability reforms, removing national insurance, saying that the taxes work twice, which translated has been accused of, punishing single parents, punishing the disabled, £45 billion cut services to Labour. Jeff's talking about, don't forget the billions the Tories have wasted. You said it about almost every government, but yes, you're right, Jeff. We can all have our view on Tory governments of the past and what they were or weren't, but I can't remember the offering they made to the public being so naked about removing things from people. It's not being sugar-coated like austerity was. It's not being called belt tightening or a sacrifice. It's just blatant. It's just, we're going to take stuff away from poor people, from single parents, from the disabled. They're undeserving in some way. It's really, I mean, you can argue that they've done that in the past, but to be obvious, but to not really be covering that up or trying to sell it to anybody, it's kind of cruel, really. Yeah. Is that going to be the election position? We're the nasty party.
Well, you worry. I think we've seen a pattern of this for a long time. I was seeing Jackie's comment there about this government blames the wrong people again. And I think that really gets to the crux of it. And I know you're referring to this speech that Rishi Sunak did on Friday that was basically like a crackdown on sick note culture. There are too many people getting sick notes, claiming depression and anxiety. We want to take the responsibility of sick notes away from GPs, and we want it to be more work-led and professional. And he makes these speeches, and you hear this sort of rhetoric where he's sounding very genuine when he's saying, there are just some people who are not doing the right thing, who are making it worse for the rest of us. And just sometimes I don't think he realizes that those people, some people that he's talking about, are hardworking people across the country. He has this, idea of like, there are so many people who are unnecessarily claiming benefits. And of course, there are always going to be some people who are using systems wrong. I've spoken about COVID fraud, for instance. There are always going to be outliers. But when we look at, you speak to the unions, and when we look at the type of jobs out there and that people have when they're claiming benefits, they have this line like, we need to make hard work pay. Well, yeah, we do. But there are people who are hardworking and are still having to claim benefits because poor quality work, poor pay, and this is a government who just sometimes feels so out of touch with people and their everyday lives I wouldn't be surprised, Susie, if this is something that we see more and more in the manifesto. Rishi Sunak, he's a former chancellor, he's a numbers man. He will, when he's grilled at liaison committees by MPs, when he's on stage doing speeches, he's got all the stats. And when you're there, a lot of the stats seem to make sense, but where is the human element? Where are the people?
I know, but Sophie, the stats, the figures show that it's families who are working who are claiming benefits. And there's a large majority on working tax credit and so on, having universal credit top-ups who are getting PIP. Right? The stats show as well that these are people who he needs to vote for him and build a coalition across society, not just appeal to one narrow part of it, the middle class, I don't want to have my money kind of angry bit. He's got to, otherwise he's not got a job, right? Yeah. And Phil says you need Labour to rebuild the country and tax the rich. Well, who knows if that's gonna work. But we've had sort of, Steve says the fact Labour's keeping the cap shows how much they're courting the ex-Tory voters. And yes, they're criticised for that, but that's the building a coalition thing, which happens. You need to appeal to over here and over there in order to get elected. And only when you're elected you can do anything. If you don't build that coalition to start with, you're a bit stuffed. What chances are there, do you think, Sophie, that these policies would actually survive to a manifesto? I mean, the question is Rishi, A, capitalising on the fact that as Prime Minister he gets free publicity, right? He can make these manifesto promises almost now as Prime Minister, get loads of coverage for it. They're kind of embedded in the national consciousness. By the time he goes to the polls, he's only got to repeat it again. Or is he B, flying a kite, trying to see how these ideas will land, almost using the nation as a big focus group, and these ideas could yet be pulled or amended? It's a difficult thing because you have both sides of, Rishi Sunak makes these pledges, he makes these announcements in the hope to get more voters. You also have a very realistic situation where there have been 20 points behind in the polls for a very long time now. I make these pledges, I make these promises as Rishi Sunak, because then I can say that I've promised them and I can criticise Labour and saying, well, we wanted this and we wanted this, whether they think that they actually need to follow through with it or not. And this is like them making pledges, like sort of these like
loose promises to cut more taxes in the spring budget, but not actually saying how they're going to be funded. And they could say, well, this is a long-term ambition. Whether they're going to have long-term to show us whether they're doing it is another question. And something else I thought that we haven't actually mentioned as well on the benefits point is the NHS waiting list. And there's been lots of research about, yes, lots more people are written off work sick with sick notes because there are record people waiting for treatment on the NHS. You know, we've got like 7.5 million on there. It's not surprised that lots of people can't go to work. You know, more people signed off with depression and anxiety. Ask them how long it is to get a therapy appointment on the NHS. If people could get treated and people could get the help that they needed, then maybe they would be working. And, you know, these are people who are going to their GP. They're going to their GP for work and getting signed off. You know, they're reaching out for that help, for that treatment, and often it's not there. I think that's a point that we need to remember.
Yeah, and there's another story in the paper, I think it might be yours actually, Sophie, about, or someone else's, about, it might be Martin Bagot's actually, our health editor. There's a story about a chap who had a dental checkup. They found mouth cancer. He went to his hospital, got treated straight away, had a huge chunk of his jaw and teeth removed. But now there's no dentist in his area and it couldn't happen again. And that obviously cuts survival rates. I think you've got a story in there about cancer waiting times, which come out from the Lib Dem policy. This is how you get people who are more depressed. If you're having to have half your face cut away, you're going to have sick notes. You're going to have to find it more difficult to get work, perhaps. If you have a disfigurement, people just, you know, find it more difficult sometimes to leave the house, never mind get a job. And so that's where some of these problems come from. I'm not entirely sure Rishi Sunak gets that. As Steve says, he's a privately educated, unelected prime minister that married a billionaireess. He has no right to say that no one ever got anything without hard work. It's much harder not to be married to a billionaireess, isn't it? John on Twitter says there's no change there. Then Thatcher did this during the 1980s, but look what happened to her. I only hope the electorate notice this time and throw the Tories out. Thatcher was re-elected 3 times. So Sunak's not managed once yet. Anyway, so we may or may not see some of these things enter the manifesto. There is a chance that they could be amended. Do you think that Rishi is, before we move on to good news very quickly, the psephology here, which is the word for, you know, the electoral mass, the science of getting elected, is Rishi even trying? Or is he just appealing to just a very, does he not realise how narrow a part of society he's appealing to?
Well, yeah, that's the question. Is he trying or is he trying too hard, I think? Because sometimes it often feels like he's reading from a script and he's trying to come up with these policies where he's picking out certain stats and trying to make them make sense and trying to show, okay, I'm going to do something that's big change because I know you need big change, but it's like, yeah, but we don't need big change from you guys. Come on, we need change from you guys. And I think that's what many people in the country, and I think that's where they've said they've had these Tory party concerts. They had this line which was, "I'm the change candidate. Vote me if you want change." And it's like, we all know you've been in power for 14 years. I don't think being the change candidate is the line that you can go on. And I think it becomes very difficult when you're in a corner. You know, he's spoken about getting the worst hospital pass ever as a prime minister, which I think, you know, you can complain, but you were in government for quite a long time, Rishi, under all of this. But with Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, they're in a bit of a crisis corner at the moment. Trying, not trying. I think it's sometimes hard to tell.
Yeah, I noticed one thing when you get that big speech about welfare reform, it was like he was coming out and with Ian Duncan Smith and at the Centre for Social Justice and going, I've got a big plan, we're going to reform welfare, there's a huge problem with it. And I was like, who was in charge of the welfare? It was Ian Duncan Smith that reformed it at a huge expense, cocked it all up, and now apparently it's terrible, we need to do it again. No, what are you doing? Anyway, there's also a great story in today's paper by me, which we haven't got to today because it's a bit niche, about nuclear test veterans, and the MOD has spent 250 grand hiding documents, which we found out about anyway, just to try and make sure that they don't get in public. And they've said that some of these documents have proliferative risks. They might help people build their own nuclear weapon. And there's also legal risks to them. And one of those documents, at least, contains blood tests of a nuclear veteran taken from him at Christmas Island in 1958 when he was flying through nuclear clouds. I do not know what proliferative risks you might have from a blood test, but I do know there's some legal risks. when they show gross abnormality to the poor bugger who was ordered through that cloud. Read the paper if you want to find out about that. Now, we have found some good news in the world for you, and here it is. Now, there is nothing quite like sisters, and Ruby and Mabel Leaning might just be the closest ones in the country. 2-year-old Mabel donated bone marrow stem cells to her big sister Ruby, age 6, when she was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Now they're age 5 and 10, and you can see from that picture, Ruby's in remission. Both girls are doing very well. They're extremely close. It's just I'm almost filling up just thinking about it, actually. It's wonderful, parts awful story, Soph, but it's got this brilliant outcome. It's absolute testament to the NHS and what they can do these days. But is this proof, do you think, there's no better solution to a problem than giving of yourself rather than taking away, Mr. Seaman?
Of course. I mean, it's a beautiful story, like you say, that, you know, one younger sister saved the others, and they're very close, I know it says in the story. And it's also, as you say, you know, we talk about the NHS and the difficulties that it's having and long waiting lists and all of this, but like, it still goes above and beyond. It still is saving lives and treating people every day. These doctors and nurses who are working in sometimes tiring, very tiring and overworked situations. And, you know, there are these amazing stories that are always coming out in times of hardship.
Yeah, if you want a little perk up of your day, then read about Ruby and Mabel. They're also fundraising to help other people in the same situation. So I think there's some links to their funds and stuff in the online version of their story. So hunt that out. It's great. Anyway, thank you very much, Sophie, for taking us through all this. Thank you to the Conservative Party for always giving us something to do. We'll have to see how things go in the next 9 months or so, won't we? Just very quickly before we go, Sophie, because in the next 10 days, I'm told Rishi might call a general election. If he does, it would be June or the rest of it. I've got 50 quid on that. Or he could go long into the autumn. Have you got any money on anything, and where would you put it if you do?
I think I'm putting money on the autumn. I'm sticking with my gut on that. I just think he wants to get to his 2-year anniversary as PM. I just still think that. Why not get 2 years in the history books?
Yeah.
And the polls aren't looking great. I mean, bad local election results or not, I don't think he's going to get much of a spring. May as well hang on for a bit longer, see if the economy does recover.
I tend to think there'd be an earlier call because that would be the practical thing to do, and that's what I would do, and that might be the politically sane thing to do. But we're not talking about that, are we? We're talking about a man, as Steve said, married to a billionaire who's probably a little bit vain. Maybe it is the autumn. Anyway, we shall have to wait and see. Thank you, Sophie, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. We will see you again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, tatty bye.
Bye.